Deportation content by Savana. Somebody once told me that this was the greatest country in the world, and I believed them. A place where, if you sacrificed a little of your personal time, you could be rich and have whatever you wanted. When I heard about the other options, places like France, Brazil, or anything east of Germany, including China, I never really got that same jolt of energy. So many rules and having to care what others thought about you. Too much doing what was right for society if it meant sacrificing your own identity. Seemed whack. The United States had its problems, but we all had a good time. That was the thinking, at least. Right up until about 2024. Things started to get a little muddy, and in ways I never thought probable, or even considered possible. Was a real trip. Started with a whisper, and ended with anything other than a whimper. If I thought hard, I could probably remember how I missed the signs. I figured there were more important things to worry about. Chalk that one up in the wrong column. How could I have seen it coming? Well, here it goes for those of you who care. Classic Hollywood, based off a true story kind of situation. Or was it inspired by a true story? Which one do people get less mad if you spruce things up a bit? Either way, don't be surprised by my improvements to some of the scenes. I really got to set the table for everyone. I'll try to keep it concise, but with a little bit of visual description. None of that dumb stuff like describing the edges of someone's face or anything, but just enough flavor for you to get an idea of what to put together in your head. Whatever. Here it goes. Me, the year 2024, and an affinity for sprinting right into the mess that you probably read about on the news sites or whatever podcast you heard it covered in, if podcasts are still in vogue whenever you get around to this. All right. On to it now. All right. On to it now. I jogged down the sun-baked sidewalk, passing the familiar rainbow of murals that marked my neighborhood. Laughter of playing children rang out from a nearby courtyard, momentarily drowning out the steady churn of traffic. This was home, filled with the sights, sounds, and scents of my community, a proper mix of degenerates and well-to-do citizens of all backgrounds. My thoughts on the matter faded as I reminisced about my favorite parts of Scorsese's latest film, Killers of the Flower Moon. One of the rare situations where I read the book ahead of the movie. Was just never a book guy. They were always so boring. This was a proper book, though, really interesting and not underrated. Finished it in 3 days. Finished the movie in 3.5 hours. But as I turned the corner, the wail of police sirens jolted me from my thoughts. 2 dark sedans with tinted windows sped past, and I glimpsed the word immigration emblazoned on their sides. Dang. Someone wasn't having a good day, I supposed. When I got home, I found my dad staring grimly at the TV. Images of distraught families and stern officers flickered across the screen. They were reporting on the first wave of deportations under the new laws targeting those here illegally. The connection quickly put itself together in my head as I announced, "Guess some of them were just waiting for the word. Go." "I don't like this, Sam," he responded, "my dad and not the reporter, just so you're not confused and think I'm out of my mind having a conversation with the TV screen." His knuckles rubbed against his chin, a habit he had picked up from his dad, who probably would have had more to worry about than him, given that he was from El Salvador. My grandma came up from somewhere halfway up the Mississippi River, and how she met my grandpa, I could never figure out. "Don't worry about it," I said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "We were born here. They can't touch us." But his eyes remained clouded with doubt. Pops was in his mid-40s and a little chubbier than me. Scared me a bit because I'd seen pictures of him in his youth. He was a stick, same as me, so an impending weight gain seemed unavoidable. He'd paid the house off in like 10 years, and I think that sapped him of a bit of his ambition. Wound down his electrical business, and the lack of physical labor certainly showed. I wasn't going to fall into the same trap. I was working until I died, so the stress would keep me skinny. "Things seem different this time," he muttered. "We're past the part where people usually jumped in to call for a pause on all this. More and more people are getting into office who support this kind of thing. In my arrogance, I belittled his anxieties, my dismissive tone betraying my lack of empathy. Deporting people who are here illegally? Half the people getting deported say it's fair they're getting deported. They know the game. Right, was all he said, as I returned to daydreaming about Jesse Plemons hamming it up in Flowers. Some people still took the news way too seriously. As a society, I thought we had already determined that the news was for nothing more than hearing what you already believed. If you wanted to feel some kind of way, or hear someone agree with you, I could guarantee there was a news anchor for you. As I finished up my shower and laid on my bed to let the steam dissipate from my skin, I wondered what it would be like to live in Osage territory in the 20s, like in Flower Moon. Now there was a situation worth stressing about. A county-wide conspiracy to be murdered for your oil rights. Later, I met Mal downtown, where she immediately launched into a tirade against the deportations. Her words blurred together as I admired the determined set of her jaw, the passion in her eyes. In that moment, I could see our wedding portrait with her in white, me in a sharp suit with clean shoes that made sounds when the soles hit the floor. She was more than just beautiful, though being beautiful was often just enough if you asked me. There was an eagerness to be a woman of the moment in her. Every time our country went through a tribulation or found itself at a crossroads, she was there to have an opinion on it. Sure, it usually amounted to group events and her surrounding herself with a bunch of guys who didn't know how to contribute anything other than a head nod, but she claimed it was for the greater good, and she believed it. I suppose on second thought, it was mainly because she was so beautiful. Half of marriages ended because one or both of the partners let themselves go physically. It would have been fair to call me shallow, but in a way, I cared more about my future marriage than a lot of other people cared about their current marriage. It had taken me forever to win her over. It was a seriously complicated and annoying hassle, a true headache. I knew that not everything worth having came easy, but Dios mio, my friends. Some of it was on me. I imagined she found it difficult to really see a future with a college dropout who spent half of his time playing in an amateur soccer league and the other half watching movies. I was trending up, though. A well-timed promotion at work had doubled my income, and even though it was in fast food, she seemed proud of me when she heard the news. For the better part of a decade, our relationship had been one of polite distance and infrequent interactions. Even then, we were barely acquaintances. Her dad sold turbines out in the Middle East, and it must have been a real life-defining experience because he was a huge asshole. He banned me from parking my first car, an old 1991 Pontiac Sunfire, in his driveway. Said it sent the wrong message to the HOA. Had to park near the playground and walk the rest of the way to his house to visit her. I thought it was kind of romantic, but it was 6 more years before me and her ended up together. A chance meeting at some protest brought us together after not talking to each other for a year. There wasn't a fight or anything that split us up. We just didn't have much to really talk about, and so I guess we just gravitated to more interesting people as time went on. I really mean it when I say chance meeting, because the only reason I showed up was a buddy of mine, Dale, dragged me along when he heard there was free food. He had a good job, so I wasn't sure why he felt so compelled to make the event, but some people are like, though. A dollar saved is a dollar earned kind of deal. Long story short, we bumped into each other, and apparently the government was working on some law that might lead to mass deportations. I mean, apparently at the time. In retrospect, accurate. She had a bunch of questions about my family and how I thought it might affect me, and I was happy to answer them if it meant going on dates and getting coffee together. Our babies would be absolutely beautiful. A true blessing. We were both blessed with a number of strong and appealing physical features and attributes. My dark brown eyes, majestic head of hair, and her nice porcelain skin. Me and her were doing our future children a solid by being so compatible. Just a flicker of a daydream before she elbowed me back to reality. "Are you even listening?" Mal huffed in exasperation. I blushed. No matter what storm brewed, as long as we were together, I knew we'd weather it just fine. It's what chemistry between two people made possible. Earth to river, she snapped, her voice bursting through my fantasy. I nodded, trying to appear engaged as I mentally scrambled to grasp what had just flown over my head. Definitely, I lied, forcing a grin that resembled an awkward, sideways smile more than anything else. You were saying about the unjustness of the whole situation? I agree. People who crossed illegally being shown the door. Wrong. Mal crossed her arms, flashing me with a look that could peel paint. This is serious. People's lives are on the line. I took in the chaos of the downtown scene surrounding us. Street vendors hawked hot tamales and elote, while a hypnotic mix of salsa music twirled through the air. Did she really pick a spot that fit the theme? There was a nice Italian spot just a couple of blocks down that we both wanted to try. I would have cared just as much about what she was saying with some chicken parmesan in front of me. Rallying sounds great, I said, with feigned enthusiasm, while secretly weighing how such activism might mess with my weekend jogging routine and checking out Babylon, directed by Damien Chazelle. The trailers made it seem like a Great Gatsby ripoff, but I had read enough things online to give it a shot. With unexpected firmness, Mal leaned in closer, eyes blazing with determination. River, do you really think people are just going to sit around and watch their families get taken away? Her earnestness was maybe the one good thing about her that trended toward off-putting. I guess, even if they let their families be taken away, you wouldn't sit back and let it happen, I quipped, wondering if she would be open to switching to the Italian spot before we ordered. Sam, she said, gripping each of my thighs with her hands. Her dark brown eyes, my preferred color of eye, peered deep into my soul, as if trying to nose out if I actually gave a damn. Unsure of where I stood on the topic, she conceded, "Even if you don't care, if you plan on spending any time with me, then you better get serious about it. I'm passionate about this." Okay, I relented. Let's do it. But what's the plan? Mal grinned triumphantly and launched into ideas about organizing peaceful protests and starting petitions. Just pledge your support, Mal continued, oblivious to my mental tug-of-war. A simple "I stand with you" from friends could make all the difference. All right, I finally said, choking back a sigh that had become its own form of resistance. Count me in. Good, Mal replied. You don't want people to think that you don't care about others. And I also want to do the right thing, seems like the right things to say here, I muttered. I was ready to face it shoulder to shoulder with Mal. To be fair, I stood a few steps back and let her handle all the organizing and messaging. She also handled all of the event planning and did community outreach. As the weeks progressed, my contributions remained unclear, however. As is often the case in life, simply maintaining my presence proved to be a significant step toward success. Just being by her side appeared to be all that she needed or wanted at that moment in time. I think she enjoyed being able to say that her boyfriend came from a potentially affected family, even though there was no chance me or my dad could be confused for illegal immigrants. I didn't know any real Spanish outside the sort of broad Hispanic entertainer catchphrases, of which made me seem less Hispanic. My dad knew a couple more phrases than me and enjoyed rice and beans at every meal, so he might have had a bit more to worry about. It would take a little more convincing for them to let him stay. So that passed a couple of weeks. We found the perfect ratio of community activism to actual dates. It went something like 3 activist days to 1 proper date. I suppose when I said we, I meant her. Still, I had a thing for brunettes with brown eyes, and she was certainly that. As we walked toward the park where our makeshift rally would take place, I tried to envision the crowd that would gather. Easier said than done, as the chatter was certainly oppressive. A harshness of voices rising, rattling against the oppressive heat of a Texas winter that hadn't quite got the memo to cool off. "Hey," Mal's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "You good?" I shrugged. "Yeah, just thinking." Maybe global warming was real, because it was hot as hell. Before I knew it, we were standing at the park entrance where people had gathered. Friends were indistinguishable from strangers, as they stood united by shared concern and urgency. I took a deep breath as Mal squeezed my hand, grounding me in the thrumming energy around us. Tension vibrated in the air like an electric buzz before a storm. Dissent had found its voice and was ready to roar together. Mal's words, not mine. "All right," Mal shouted over the gathering crowd, her voice igniting a spark of collective enthusiasm. "Listen up, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for our families, friends, and neighbors who can't stand here with us." I watched as her fire spread. Faces brightened as heads nodded in agreement. It was beautiful and terrifying. Who would have thought that Mal could rally these many hearts just by speaking her truth? "River," Mal called to me. "You ready? We need your voice." "Right." I cleared my throat. Nothing like a preemptive dry swallow to capture attention. So... My words tumbled out awkwardly at first, but slowly morphed into something more coherent as I caught glimmers of encouragement in Mal's glance. "We're here to show that we won't stand idle while families are torn apart. Together, we are stronger than any unjust system trying to divide us." It was crazy. I could say the same thing that other people had said 1,000 times, and people still ate it up like it was the first time they heard it. "Let's make some noise," someone shouted from behind me, and that seemed to unleash the floodgates. The crowd erupted into cheers and chants, voices merging into one chorus reverberating against the Texas sky. Mal's hands came together with a resounding clap, her excitement infectious, adding to the building fervor of the crowd. "Yes, and remember," she added with conviction, "these aren't just numbers or statistics. These are people with lives worth fighting for." Amidst all this enthusiasm, one thought nagged me like an itch I couldn't scratch. What if we faced a backlash? What if those numbers turned against us? I wasn't a huge politics person, but if politicians were voting for this, then I wagered to guess this was what their constituents wanted. Maybe that wasn't how politics worked. I always heard people complaining that politicians weren't representing their constituents well, so this could have been one of those situations. Maybe I needed to watch the news more. My earliest recollection of anything news-related was how often there were typos. All that money and all that professionalism, typos still slipped through. Had to be annoying. "River," Mal called, pulling me from my thoughts with a touch of urgency. "Keep that fire going. People need to hear you." I took a breath, grounding myself as I looked at the sea of determined faces. Each one was a testament to the fragility and fury of this moment. It was like being on an improvised stage surrounded by familiar strangers, everyone waiting for their cue. "Right," I said again, but less nervously this time, amplifying my voice to cut through the buzz. I had no idea what to say next, so I just repeated what she said. "Let's take it a step further. We need to tell our stories, and we need them to be heard." "Who here is affected?" I asked, gesturing for hands to rise. Countless arms shot up, some trembling as they reached toward the sky like sunflowers yearning for light. "This isn't just numbers or politics. These are lives, our lives." And then it happened. Someone from the back yelled out, "My uncle! They took him last week." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap in summer, electrifying the atmosphere as more voices followed suit. His uncle had a vehicular manslaughter charge when he was drunk and drove into some college kid, but still technically counted. My cousins, too. They were drug dealers, not murders or anything, but they counted too. They're targeting us all, the crowd shouted. Were they really, though? Most of these people came across as criminals. I found it difficult to feel as sorry for them as for some of the more innocent people who were deported. People had been complaining about all the illegal immigration for a good chunk of my life north of 2 decades. If they were looking to round them all up, they had been lackadaisical about it at best. Lackadaisical. Funny word that was once used in one of my work reviews. Been a favorite of mine ever since. Mal stepped beside me, her warmth radiating as she leaned into the microphone, her presence a comforting weight. "You see this?" she said, sweeping her arm out over everyone gathered. "This is what power looks like. Together, we are writing a new chapter, one where your families aren't ripped apart over arbitrary lines drawn by lawmakers who have never lived our struggles." The tension started to shift from nervous anxiousness into something potent and transformative. These people were inspired to let others know how unhappy they were. "Let's march," Mal cried suddenly, shaking me from my spiral. "To City Hall." The crowd roared in response, enthusiasm washing over us all like a wave surging forward. My heart pounded alongside the rhythm of our collective purpose. "What about signs?" someone shouted, and without missing a beat, Mal smiled and pointed toward an amused elderly man sitting on a bench nearby who had been knitting throughout our fervor. "Mr. Garcia, you've got an excellent collection of protest gear, right?" That sent everyone into laughter. Mr. Garcia looked up with twinkling eyes before nodding knowingly. He was working on an Afghan in various colors, the perfect makeshift banner, perhaps? Banners could come later. Right now, we had momentum and spirit. As we prepared to march, I felt a swell of excitement mixed with skepticism. The sunny sky above seemed oblivious to our looming concerns, and the distant sound of city traffic was punctuated by the laughter pouring from Mal's lips. Her intention, pure and infectious, was an interesting counter to the theme of misery and fear that brought everyone together. Then again, I was here, and I barely cared, so maybe it wasn't so unreasonable she could find something to smile about. At least someone here was having a good time. So, there it was. The spark that would light the fire that would turn around this country's way of thinking. The fire that would shape the compassion needed to undo this desire to deport their fellow people. Almost half of the population of a solid chunk of states had at least one member of their family that was an illegal immigrant. Facing such fierce opposition, any attempt at advancement would be futile. They were powerless against it. This was a country shaped by people complaining and getting what they want. And as far as I could tell, there were a lot of people here complaining. If history taught me anything, it's that we had the power, right? Well, as a great person who didn't exist once said, "I am too smart for history."